So let's begin with the word of prayer.
Okay.
Dear Father, we are thankful, Lord, for this morning, for the opportunity to study again together. We ask, Lord, that as we look into the Sunday law and the connections that were seen back in 1998 and that are understood now, that we can understand clearly the role the papacy plays and the message that we need to give in regard to these events. May your Holy Spirit be here to teach us, each one of us, to work upon our hearts and to bring about our conversion. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So good morning, everyone. And we're addressing Daniel chapter 11, verse 40 to 45, and particularly the passage that deals with the Ethiopians and the Libyans. So we're dealing with the Sunday law part of that. And in trying to understand Jeff's position from 1998, and even his position that he had much later, I don't think he ever changed his position on that, that the Libyans and the Ethiopians represent the poor and the rich. We asked yesterday, trying to understand what that means, what the context of that means. So this is when the papacy stretches its hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold, silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And then it mentions that the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps, which we're taking as a reference that they also are following the papacy. So to try to understand what that means prophetically, I think this is one of those sections that to me has not really been meaningful. That is, I don't know how saying that the rich and the poor, what that means in the context of the Sunday law, who that would be specifically. Is this referring to countries or just generally rich and poor? That is just all classes. But I think it must mean something more than that. Now, we're going to, before we get into that particular point, we want to address this encyclical that we refer to, Des Domini, and it was given or issued on May 31st, 1998. Now, it's not published, according to all the sources I can find, until, I'm going to go back here, until, what's the date? Yeah. Okay, no, this is May 31st. I'm trying to find this one. Well, for instance, Laudato Si, however you pronounce that. That's one that's the second encyclical by Pope Francis, and that is on May 24th, 2015. It's 17 years after this Des Domini, and these are both pivotal encyclicals, and both of them are issued on the rabbinic day of Pentecost, which is interesting. So Stephen had noticed this. So they're, I'm trying to remember how many days. I think it's 6,000, not that the dates really matter, but just looking here. Yeah, the days between these two encyclicals are 6,230 days from Des Domini and the other one. I don't speak Italian or Latin or whatever it is. It's probably Latin. So the question has to do with the significance of these encyclicals. So Des Domini was in a newspaper in Detroit, is the article that Jeff is referring to. And that was a newspaper dated July 7th, 1998. So it's roughly a month after the issuing of Des Domini. I know I'm a little bit scattered here on trying to go through this. So that one's May, and I'm just trying to find out the date that it's published. And so that one. So they have a publishing date. Okay, so when it comes to Des Domini, according to Wikipedia, here it says on May 31st, 1998, in this, what you see on your screen, Pope John Paul issued an apostolic letter. According to Wikipedia, Des Domini is an apostolic letter promulgated by Pope Paul John II on July 30th, 1998. So this article then, that's published on July 7th, is published prior to it being promulgated. So what's promulgated mean? And why is there this different date? So I'm trying to figure that out, why they have two different dates. I mean, promulgated just means to promote something, make it widely known. So it also can mean to put a law or decree into effect by official proclamation. And maybe that's what they mean by promulgated. Anybody familiar with what we're talking about here, what I'm asking? So it seems like they issue a encyclical and then they publish it. And when they publish it, it then becomes official, but I don't know how people read it before it's published. I'm not sure what that means. Any thoughts on that?
Is it possible, rather than publishing, that this becomes like one of their sermons or their homilies, so that they address it publicly and then publish it later?
Yeah, that's the impression I get, but I can't find them because, they'll say it's like here it says issued an apostolic letter on May 31st, but it's not promulgated, or which would mean put into effect or something, until July 30th, 1998.
Promulgated is formally made public.
Right.
So in other words, they give the formal presentation.
Mm-hmm. So maybe he reads it on that day?
It's very possible.
That he issues this letter and then he reads it. Now, of course, Des Domini, according to Wikipedia, here's what it says. Pope John Paul II explains the meaning of the Sunday in the light of Christian tradition. I think it's interesting that they mention it, the Sunday, because that's often how early Adventists referred to it.
Okay, so May 31st, 1998 would have been the first day of the week. So as the first day of the week, it was very possible that this pontiff would have given a sermon, and it's possible that that sermon was Des Domini.
Yeah, possibly that's what's referred to. And so when we get to July 31st, though, that's just a weekday. It's not, so, or July 30th is the other date. I'm just looking at July 30th right now. No significance that I can see here. It's the 5th day of the 5th month on the biblical calendar, but it's a Thursday. So it's published on a Thursday or promulgated. So yeah, he must have given a a presentation. See, he would have given the presentation, I think, originally in a sermon, and then it would be published later. That seems to me what's happening here. Now, people sent me a few things about this, that this was a big issue in Adventism back in 1998. And we've heard it referenced over the last 20 years quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot of people have talked about it. Adventists have talked about it. And back in 1998, you're going to feel that this is leading to an imminent Sunday law. And so we have this question that we talked about. How did 9/11 hinder a Sunday law? And I don't know if we fully came to a conclusion on that matter. To me, it would have seemed to speed up a Sunday law, but it didn't. It definitely did hinder what was happening at that time. And it's hard to know, what if 9/11 hadn't had happened, what was in place at that time that we don't know about, that would have led to a Sunday law. So I think that it woke up a lot of people, especially as their freedoms began to be taken away because of the Patriot Act, and that there's some kind of opposition that arose to the Sunday law, that a lot of these things would be done in darkness. They would be things behind the scenes that we can't know about. We can only conjecture. We can see what happened externally. We could see that was no Sunday law, and that things didn't unfold the way that Adventists would have expected them to unfold. So 9/11 brought in a new element prophetically that was unforeseen by Adventists and was seen by Jeff, but not to its ultimate effect, because what he believed, as we looked at his in notebook 3, if you remember what he said, is that this Sunday law, I'm just going to go there here, go to notebook 3. So this is, I can never remember what page it's on. It's on a different page than in the edition I had before. I need to remember this. Excuse me, here I have to search this. Next time I'll try to remember the page. It's 97. Okay, so, and this is this section on Sunday law in the United States, where he says, modern radical Islam will torment and hurt the beast that was, that is the USA, through sudden and violent actions, with the emphasis on modern gunpowder. It will also hurt and torment the beast that is, which at this point is coming together into the threefold union of modern Babylon, the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet, the United Nations, the New World Order. The circumstances created by radical Islam will provide an environment politically, economically, socially, and religiously to pass a Sunday law in the USA. At this point, the sealing of God's people begins. So what is Jeff here saying about the role of radical Islam? Is it hinder the Sunday law or help the Sunday law?
It would hinder it.
Well, if it says the circumstances created by radical Islam will provide the environment politically, economically, socially, and religiously to pass a Sunday law in the USA, that to me would seem like it would be almost like the catalyst to lead to the Sunday law. So you remember, this would be the year 2000. So this is prior to 9/11. And Jeff is looking at an imminent Sunday law. And part of what he does in this study on the trumpets is he comes to a position that what happens with Islam is going to be um, something that leads to the Sunday law, not hinders the Sunday law. At this point, even though, we can see the role of Islam is to protect God's people from a Sunday law, he's not taking that position here, right? And if you go just a little bit earlier, it says Islam, a power from the bottomless pit, sudden and violent in nature, after a prolonged war between atheism and Catholicism, Islam begins its warfare again. This is the fulfillment of the prophet Ishmael, the one that, every man, he will be against every man and every man's hand against him. So there's something that's not being understood by Jeff in the 1990s, in the year 2000, that he doesn't come to understand until after 9/11 regarding Islam. He knows that Islam is an enemy of the Catholic Church based upon Revelation 9. But he's looking at it as something that leads to the Sunday law. Any thoughts on that? Okay, I don't hear you. I think that's Pat trying to talk. So I don't hear anything.
Oh, too bad he didn't go into a little more detail about that.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of detail. I mean, maybe we should even go through his study of the trumpets and how he sees it connected to the Sunday law, because I haven't actually read the entire article. It's a little bit scattered in that he has these constant references back and forth. And that's one of the reasons you can see when this article is written. It's just based on the context of everything that's said, and also all the other articles in this collection in this notebook, that it's in the year 2000 that this is written. So it's prior to 9/11 by about a year. So Jeff is seeing something in here. Maybe I need to go back and study this article more clearly. But just look at this section here. He's going to take collapse of the Soviet Union. So he's going to go back to this. So this is the context in which he makes this statement. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him, like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Now he is just introducing this collapse of the Soviet Union right after he's dealing with the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And we know that he sees a parallel between the fall of the Ottoman Empire in August 11th, 1840, with a parallel of the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. So if he's going to line up August 11th, 1840, back in this early history prior to 9/11, he's going to line up August 11th, 1840, not with 9/11, but with 1989, right? So that's the position that he has. And so that seems to be the context in which he's addressing this issue of the fall of the Soviet Union and radical Islam. Atheism, a power from the bottomless pit. It kills the beast that was. In 1798, the papal power was the beast that was, according to Revelation 17:10. So he sees that France is this atheistic power that has this war with the United States. During this history, the USA, the beast that is taken away as it begins its role of placing the papacy on the throne of the earth, paralleling the history of 508 and the daily. The fulfillment of verse 40 technically begins the loud cry of the fourth angel. Heretofore, those who presented the truths of the third angel's message have often been regarded as mere alarmists. Their predictions that religious intolerance would gain control in the United States, that church and state would unite to persecute those who keep the commandments of God, have been pronounced groundless and absurd. It has been confidently declared that this land could never be other than what it has been, the defender of religious freedom. But as the question of enforcing Sunday observance is widely agitated, the event so long doubted and disbelieved is seen to be approaching, and the third message will produce an effect which it could not have had before. So we're seeing that Ellen White is talking about these events that are going to happen, that we're going to see the Sunday law come into play, and in a way that was unexpected, because people could not see how it was going to occur. And so it's going to have this effect. So we know that a Sunday law is going to come, and it's going to have this effect on those, obviously, who are looking for truth. The verse ends with Gorbachev journeying to meet with Pope John Paul II, giving him his kingdom. So when he's talking about the verse ending, he's talking about he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So Gorbachev goes to John Paul II, gives him his kingdom. On his return to the Soviet Union, Gorbachev begins perestroika, and shortly thereafter, the Soviet Union collapses. The collapse of atheism was also a threefold struggle, paralleling Egypt, Turkey, and the four great powers of Europe. So again, he's looking at what happened in August 11th, 1840, and he's lining this up with what happened in 1989. So we know then that this is not after 9/11. It announced the beginning of the process where the USA surrenders itself to the papacy, and then comes national ruin. The process reaches into the next verse, just as the 150 years began in the fifth trumpet, or first woe, but connected with the second woe. The war between atheism and communism, the king of the north and the king of the south, in verse 40, preceded the rise of modern Islam, just as the war between Rome and Persia was the key to the rise of Islam in the fifth trumpet. So what is he doing here? We have to get into his mind a little bit and look back and think a little differently of how Jeff is looking at this. So when he says the war between atheism and communism, this is the king of the north. Now it says the war between atheism and communism. So what is he talking about here? Is that what he means, or is that a typo?
He's referring to the Cold War.
Okay, is the Cold War a war between atheism and communism?
No, it's not. It's a war between atheism and Catholicism.
So I think it's a typo.
I should have said the time of the war is during the Cold War.
Yeah. But so is this a typo? It must be. He must mean atheism and Catholicism. Correct?
That's what I would say.
Yeah, so because I don't see a war between atheism and communism. Anyway, so when he says the king of the north and the king of the south, that would be the Catholic Church and the atheism. So I believe
You would maybe
what's that?
you could maybe see capitalism as well being the war, rather than it was mainly the Cold War was mainly capitalism and communism.
Yeah, but capitalism isn't atheism.
Yes.
So I'm just saying.
So he's maybe He maybe means atheism and capitalism. Maybe, I don't know.
I don't think so, because I don't think atheism is opposed to capitalism. Many atheists are capitalists. I mean, it's not talking about an economic situation. It's talking a philosophy. So I'm pretty sure it's just a typo, but he means.
Or else maybe he's got on his mind capitalism and communism.
Well, I don't think he's talking about capitalism at all. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not a war between capitalism and communism. I mean, I wouldn't see it. I mean, you could, I guess, try to argue that that's what it is, but I would think it's a battle between the king of the north and the king of the south, which is not atheism and communism. That's the main point. However you want to think what words he wanted to use. Now, so if we're taking it that this war between the United States with the papacy, because he's making an argument that it preceded the rise of modern Islam. So when is the rise of modern Islam? How would where would we place the rise of modern Islam? So obviously in 1998, modern Islam has now become part of the news. And I know that began when did that begin? That modern Islam started to become noticed.
1979.
Okay, so 1979. That's the year I would put on it. And what happened in 1979?
You have two things. You have the Ayatollah Khomeini
Yeah.
come to power in Iran, and then you have Russia going into Afghanistan.
Right. Yeah. So it's with the Afghani war in 1979, and that's a history that I know because I remember specifically the war beginning, and then the Olympics being boycotted by the United States and Canada, the Russian Olympics, Moscow Olympics. And I remember that because my dad had bought some Olympic stamps for the Russian Olympics. And, they were like, and they had like gold ones and stuff. I don't know what ever happened to those. It was some kind of investment that he thought it was a good investment, which I thought was ridiculous. But anyway, I remember all that just because of some personal things that happened. And then there was also a bunch of events that occurred in connection with what was happening with the Ayatollah Khomeini. So Islam started to come on the rise. Now, in the 1970s, if you were to go into these Islamic countries, you wouldn't really notice that much difference between being any other place in Europe. And how people dressed. Women would go to the beach in bikinis. I mean, there was not, burqas everywhere. And the hijabs or hijab, whatever you call those. People were dressed as Westerners. That change that happened began, I believe, with the Ayatollah Khomeini. And then so we saw this occur. Now, in 1993, we did have the first attack on the World Trade Center. And that seems not to be noticed by Jeff in anything that I've seen. He doesn't refer to this directly in any way that I know of, even in this paper. I mean, he talks about radical Islam and an attack on the United States, but he doesn't seem to be pointing to something in the past. He appears to be pointing to something in the future. So he's not looking back at 1993 and saying that's this attack on the United States by radical Islam, and there are some people who think that that's the event that we should look to, or at least one person. So anyway, this war between the king of the north and the king of the south precedes the rise of modern Islam. So did this war between the king of the north and the king of the south precede 1979? Would we take that position? when does this war between the Catholic Church and atheism or the Soviet Union begin?
Yeah, we understood it as during the time of the Cold War, because the mutual exhaustion of the United States and Russia was to create a power vacuum that would allow Islam to rise.
Yeah, so this
That's how we understood.
yeah, so this must be a reference to the Cold War itself. So this would be, so the king of the North here is the United States, and the king of the South then is the USSR.
Yes, right.
And we know from reading Avril Manhattan, his book, The Vatican and World Politics, just in the introduction, that he sees that there are three powers vying for the control of the world. That's the United States, the Soviet Union, and the Vatican, right? So now we know that there is this alliance between the Vatican and the United States. Now, how do we see that alliance? How do we look at that alliance in our movement? Why do we call the United States the King of the North and not something else? Why do we connect it with the papacy in that context? This is not like some mystical question. It's just a pretty straightforward question. Okay, let's go back. So who put the papacy on the throne of the earth in 538?
Yeah, France, atheism.
Right, and France took the papacy off the throne of the earth in 1798. Now, what's the connection between France and the United States?
You mean as regards the papacy?
No. As a symbol. Is there any connection between France and the United States as a symbol?
A two-horn power.
Okay, and how's France a two-horn power?
Sodom and Egypt.
Okay, so Sodom and Egypt, and then the United States is republicanism and Protestantism. Okay, so
Yep.
Now, and then when we put the United States as the King of the North, what are we doing? Because we know that the papacy is the King of the North. So when we say the United States is the King of the North, what do we mean?
It's the armies of Rome.
Okay, so it's the armies of Rome. So the United States becomes connected with Rome. That is, the papacy falls, the United States rises, but the United States is going to lend its armies to Rome. So in 1798, the United States is just rising. It's this two-horn power, republicanism and Protestantism. It's opposed to the papacy in every single way, right? The United States is not a Catholic country. It is a Protestant country. But yet that country is going to lend its army to the papacy. And so in that way, it becomes the King of the North. That's the way that we understand it. So this war that's going on between the United States and the Soviet Union and the Catholic Church and the United States, so all these powers are against each other because they're all vying for the same territory. They all want to be in control of the world. But two of these powers, the United States and the Vatican, join their forces to overthrow the Soviet Union. But this leads to the Vatican overthrowing the United States. But now the Vatican has to have control of the world. So it overthrows the USSR. What happens to atheism when the Soviet Union is overthrown?
Apparently moves to the United Nations.
It moves to the United Nations. So the United Nations now has basically inherited the philosophy of the Soviet Union. The United Nations is not built upon the same philosophy as the USA is. It tends towards atheism and socialism, and is opposed to the United States. And I always find this history very strange with the United States. I've never really fully understood why they put the UN in the United States. It's in New York, right? The UN building's in New York. Why is that? Anybody know?
Had they placed it in Europe, they would have been placing it in an area that had been at various times under domination of different rulers. Placing it in the United States placed it in neutral ground because at that point, America had been seen as a bastion of freedom rather than a bastion of dominating control.
Yeah, I always thought they should have put it in Switzerland, but I guess
Yeah,
they wanted it.
Rockefeller gave them the land.
Yeah, just giving them the land, though, doesn't mean, they're going to have to build it. But it seems that the United States then, by the UN being in the US, puts the United States in a position of power, even though they don't legally own it. It still gives them some control. So it's just a very strange situation to me, the whole UN thing, because it is in the United States. And obviously these are ambassadors who go to the UN. I mean, it's, and ambassadors can be withdrawn. And if you killed all the ambassadors, it wouldn't really mean anything. They're just representing their countries on these issues. But it's just a very strange situation. So anyway, you have the papacy and the United States are in this alliance. And the purpose that the papacy has and the purpose that the United States has are really at odds with each other because they're both seeking for the same power. And both think that by making this alliance to overthrow a common enemy, that it will place them in a position to meet their ends. Now, the United States is not necessarily opposed at that time to the Vatican itself. But really, if you look at the philosophy of the United States, the belief system that undergirds it, and you look at the papacy, they're completely at odds. And yet they come together to take down this common enemy. And so the view that's seen in 1998 and here even in the year 2000 is that the United States then is going to be overthrown with the Sunday law. And then ultimately, atheism, the UN, will be controlled by the papacy. The papacy is really the one that's going to be seated upon the throne of the earth. So I think there's a lot more that we have to examine here regarding how Jeff understood this, these events that led to the papacy being set upon the throne of the earth in 538. And also the events dealing with radical Islam. So, because Islam, so you have this war, the events that lead to put the papacy on the throne of the earth are in 538, and Islam arises in 606, right? So it's it's less than 100 years later that you have the rise of Islam. So he's making the same parallel. You have this war between Rome and Persia that was the key to the rise of Islam in the fifth trumpet. So what's he talking about, this war between Rome and Persia? Is anybody familiar with what he's talking about here?
He applied it to United States versus Russia. It's like a long drawn out war
Okay. Yeah.
that weakens each side.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah. Okay.
and then Islam rises up, and when they're both weakened, and
Okay.
are able to influence, being to be a player.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of logic to this argument. Is this an argument that we've heard recently in this movement? Is this how we see this history now? Because to me, this is sort of a new position. You know, we're looking back at the foundation of this message, some things that Jeff is writing, you know, in the year 2000, and we're not familiar with this. At least I'm not. So I think when he talks about the war between Rome and Persia, what war is he talking about, like in history?
There's a name for those wars, but I can't remember it.
Yeah. Okay, so this would be the history where Constantine, and these probably have gone on for a while, but Constantine, you know, he's going to be moving his armies to or his city capital, to Constantinople. And Constantinople, this is the Roman Empire is extending into the east. Now Persia is still, you know, it's part of that territory, I guess. It depends how you look at it. But this is what's going on, is this battle where, and it's really going to be Eastern Rome, ultimately, that's involved in all this history, because this is going to deal with the fall of the Roman Empire. And so he makes a statement here, was the key to the rise of Islam in the fifth trumpet. Now, I'm not sure how it was the key to the rise of Islam. It's obviously history that was involved. But could it be that what he's arguing is that because of Rome coming against Islam, or coming against the Arabs, that's why Islam took on this military role to basically take back territory? You know, it's not clear. He's not really telling us much here. So, and then he says the fulfillment of verse 40 was designed to bring power into Adventism, but we sleep on in our Laodicean coma. So he's saying here that what happened in 1989 was a repeat of history that is supposed to awaken us to the coming Sunday law. And he's paralleled it to the fall of the Ottoman Empire, but he also refers back to the history that leads up to even Islam beginning. So this is very new, at least to my mind, of an understanding of 1989. So this is something that, you know, I'm going to have to look into a little bit more. I need to study this paper to understand this. So let's go back to this briefly. So we have what's happening.
Islam is very militaristic.
Yeah, Islam is militant, and so we know that about Islam. But I'm just saying, going back to that early history of the rise of Islam connected to these Persian and Roman wars, I've never heard that in this message, and so that's a new idea. And also, of course, the idea that 1989 is a parallel with August 11th, 1840. that's a relatively new idea. We've just been learning about that's how Jeff saw this. And as we go back and we look again, because we're going to come back to these changes that happen in our understanding of the lines, especially once we get to 9/11. But I think it's extremely important that we see that development happening in this movement, that Jeff is looking at August 11th, 1840 as lining up with, and here's how I would do it. I'm just going to go to the whiteboard and show you what I mean of how I understand that Jeff is seeing this. So, we got a lot of stuff here after race. So, now, we have this, our lines the way we understand them now. We would look at it the way, here's how I'm going to show it. Here we have August 11th, 1840. What is Jeff lining this up with? So he's got the time of the end here, 1798. So if he's putting August 11th, 1840 here, and he's saying that this is 1989, this is 1989, what's he doing in this line? Why is he bringing these two together to both represent 1989? Because that's 42 years.
Well, the time of the end and the fall of the USSR just happen at different times, but they have the same meaning.
Yeah, so maybe you could say that he's really lining this up like that. Is that what he's doing? He's taking, this is the time of the end when the Soviet Union, when the wall of Berlin Wall comes down, but he's really pointing to August 11th, 1840 as being the actual fall of the Soviet Union. Would that be correct?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Now he's also then taking 1449, pardon me, and lining it up with this way, correct? Even though he hasn't explicitly stated it in anything I've read. But would we say that he's making this connection?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of implied. And later on, Jeff brings this history into this. So one of the things I find interesting is that Jeff has a long history of understanding this history of the rise of Islam and the role that Islam played. He understands things about the trumpets, right? He's studied into Adventist understanding of the trumpets. He's very familiar with these things, with the pioneer view. And in 1998, in the year 2000, he's looking back at this history and he's seeing that Islam has this role that is also paralleling what happens with the Soviet Union from 1989 to 1991. And yet, we wouldn't take the position that Islam is the king of the South. Right? So that means there's some weaknesses in his parallel, and that he's making some of the same mistakes that Miller and the Josiah Litch make in their interpretation of the trumpets themselves. So they're not, and we can see that they both have this connection between the trumpets and Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45, though they're never explicit connections. They just see that there's a history that they share in common. And that's why the Millerites would see August 11th, 1840 as a close of probation. The fall of Turkey is going to be this close of probation. So they're making some of the same mistakes. And by mistakes, it's not like they're doing something wrong. They're looking at it from their perspective. And that's
Do
good.
we call it a leap of logic?
Well, it's a leap of logic. I would say it's trying to make sense out of something that you don't have enough information yet. And we all do that. We're trying to make sense. We have partial information, partial understanding, and we're trying to draw conclusions from that. And so the conclusions are not illogical, though at times they appear to supersede Miller's rules. That is, they don't take into account some contradictions that their logic is presenting. Because you're not going to have Islam be the king of the South, which the Soviet Union is. And Islam is not represented as atheism. It is a satanic power. So there is a similarity, we see that in Revelation, between, because it rises from the bottomless pit, right? So we know that Islam has a similar origin spiritually to the papacy, and in that they're all satanic powers, right? But anyway, that's the issue. I think that we have to look at a little bit more as we move through this. So now, when we go to Notebook 1, where we're reading about this, and I hope this is helpful for people, what we're going through here. This is, I mean, it's a little bit disconnected. It's not like this is a smooth presentation on these things, because we're trying to work through some of these problems that are arising. Now, so we have here these powers, and this is what I wanted to look at, was when it says Ethiopia and Libya would be at his steps, right? Now, let's see, where were we here? So he's going to deal with, okay, unrighteous decrees. Talks about the escape, closed door. So it's not in a logical order here, what he's doing. So I'm just going to look at the passage here. So the passage is in verse 42 and 43. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So when we talk about the land of Egypt not escaping, this means that the world is going to be under this Sunday law, right? That's what's being talked about. Now, these statements here, at his steps, well, I need to read the other passage first. That's a reference to verse 43. And he, that is the king of the north, shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So the Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf to grasp the hand of spiritualism. They will reach over the abyss to clasp the hands with the Roman power. And under the influence of this threefold union, this country will follow in the steps of Rome in trampling on the rights of conscience. In the movements now in progress in the United States to secure for the institutions and usages of the church the support of the state, Protestants are following in the steps of papists. Nay, more, they are opening the door for the papacy to regain in Protestant America the supremacy which he has lost in the old world. And then he says, can two walk together except they be agreed? Amos 3:3. So he's just saying that they're going to be in agreement with each other. This country will follow in the steps of Rome. So when he says, but this at his steps is in reference to the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So they're going to be in agreement. And then he addresses this escape. The law of God cannot be made. So he takes the word, talks about slipperiness, right? So that's what it's, something that slips or escapes. The law of God cannot be made void by the law of a nation. When the law is trampled in the dust, the sacredness of the commandments of God will be vindicated by those who are loyal to him. We are to make no railing accusation against the nations, for this would close our way so that we could not set the light before the people. Every objection raised against the commandments of God will make a way for the advancement of truth and enable its advocates to present its value before men. There is a beauty and a force in the truth that nothing can make so apparent as opposition and persecution. When this is revealed, many will be converted to the truth. So here he puts escaping out of the hand of the papacy, of those that are converted. And talks about closed door, Christian theater, what's going to happen on a worldwide level. And then he's going to address Lot's descendants. So this is Edom, Moab, and Ammon he's going to refer to, because these ones do escape. And he's going to give us some studies here dealing with this. We've done some of this study before when we were dealing with the book of Ezekiel. And one of the things he's doing here, so this is, he's dealing with this threefold aspect. So he's talking about Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon, Daniel 11:41. Isaiah 11:14 mentions Edom, Moab, and the children of Ammon. Nehemiah, you have this threefold enemy, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. So you have the Horonite, the moon god, sin has given life. Tobiah the Ammonite, Yahweh is good. And Geshem the Arabian, born in the rainy season, his name means. Descendant of Ishmael, Arabians are a family of tribes. So he has this plural aspect to it as well. So he's saying that one of them, the children of Ammon, that's a plural. And then Geshem the Arabian, that refers to a plural. So what is he doing here? What is this plural about? Judges, Midian, Amal, the children of the east, Moab, Midian, Balaam of Pethor, which is the land of the children of his people. Anybody know what he's doing?
He noticed a kind of parallel, well, a recurring circumstance of the two singulars and then a plural entity.
Yeah. What he's doing is Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and he's lining this up with the beast, the false prophet, and the dragon. So he's saying Ammon represents the UN. Correct? This plural power.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what he's doing. Now we've taken the position, or at least I have, that Edom, Moab, and Ammon are references to the Protestants in the United States. They're not a reference to the threefold union in the way that Jeff is trying to apply it here. So that position is different. But that's what he's doing here. So I'm just referring to this here to understand this. Now he's going to talk about the banner of the third angel's message, some quotes from Testimonies, Volume 8, and early writings. So the one in Testimonies 8 is definitely important here in this context. In vision, I saw two armies in terrible conflict. One army was led by banners bearing the world's insignia. The other was led by the blood-stained banner of Prince Emmanuel. Standard after standard was left to trail in the dust as company after company from the Lord's army joined the foe, and tribe after tribe from the ranks of the enemy united with the commandment-keeping people of God. The army following the banner with the inscription, the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, was gloriously triumphant. So this is talking about God's church conquering the world, and that when company after company, companies are smaller than tribes. So when tribe after tribe joins us, many more will join than will leave Adventism. That's the way I understand that passage. And then he's going to refer to Ellen White's reference to the gathering time. And again, in the year 1998 and the year 2000, whenever this one, I think this one would be like 98, notebook 1. We don't have Jeff really understanding the gathering time in the way that he later understands it. He doesn't understand the 225:20s. He's not making that type of application. Now, he's going to quote a passage from Isaiah chapter 11. And it says, "In that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will set again his hand again, the second time, to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria and from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush is Ethiopia, from Elam, from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. But they shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines towards the west, and they shall spoil them of the east together. They shall lay their hand upon Edom and Moab, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. The Lord shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and with his mighty wind shall he shake his hand over the river, and shall smite it in the seven streams, and make men go over dry shod. And there shall be an highway for the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, like as it was to Israel in the day that he came up out of the land of Egypt." So Ellen White is referring to this in her quote from early writings. She's referring to this verse. And now Jeff is looking at this verse. And what is he seeing? How is Jeff understanding this? Just in a simple way. What is Jeff, how is he taking this statement from early writings and the passage that she's quoting from the Bible? How is he applying this?
A new gathering time.
Okay, a gathering time. Now, part of it is, I think, his understanding about what Ellen White means about the gathering time and why she refers to this verse. Because Ellen White is making an application. So what is this verse talking about? If we go, let's just go there to Isaiah chapter 11. Now, what is the context of Isaiah chapter 11? Anybody know? We should know this. Isaiah chapter 11 is connected to chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10, and 12. What's the context of Isaiah chapter 11?
Division of Israel.
Yeah, so it's dealing with the beginning of the 225:20s. Because this is happening during the Civil War that began in probably 743, but in 742 BC, when Ahaz becomes king. This is the same prophecy that starts in chapter 7, dealing with the 65 years. Right? So this is all part of the same prophecy. So the context is this civil war that's happening between the north and the south. Okay, and then when it says, there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. Who is this referring to?
Referring to Christ, isn't it?
Okay, so it is referring to Christ. So we know that this is a prophecy about Christ. And if you go back and you look at chapter 7, you're going to have a prophecy about this, because this is a prophecy regarding the house of David, that is the descendants of David, right? So in verse Isaiah 7:13, and he said, hear ye now, O house of David, is it a small thing for you to weary men? But will ye weary my God also? The house of David, David is a descendant of Jesse, correct? He's the son of Jesse. So when it talks about Jesse, it's talking about David. So we know that this is the line of David that's being talked about. And then it says, therefore, the Lord himself should, oh, I'm not showing you my screen. So let's go here. I was reading these passages and nobody was seeing what I was reading. Okay. So then it says, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. So who's the virgin?
Mary.
It's not Mary, because if it was
Parallel to Isaiah's wife.
okay, it's not a parallel to Isaiah's wife either. The virgin is Israel. So that's the virgin that shall conceive and bear a son. Now, it is, an application is made in the New Testament to Christ being born of a virgin and the Virgin Mary. But the application here of this prophecy is in the context of this civil war that's happening.
Okay, so in other words, while Mary was the literal virgin, you're saying that Israel is the spiritual virgin.
Yeah, I would probably put it the other way around, but it depends what you mean by literal and spiritual in this context. As a type, the land of Israel is typifying what happens here, is typifying what's going to happen literally when Christ is born. You're going to have a literal virgin who is, in that sense, who is going to have this son, right? So I guess you could say that's type and antitype in this way. But the context here is this 65 years. So this one that's born to this virgin is the seed of David. He's of the house of David, and it's going to be Manasseh. Manasseh is the one that's being prophesied about directly in this context. It's not a prophecy about Christ. So it says, butter and honey he shall eat. Butter and honey is a reference to affliction that occurs when a land is depopulated, because the only thing left is butter, because you have cows still, and honey. So and this can be shown. I'm not going to go through it all here, but I've done a study on this to show that that's what it's a reference to. It's a Hebrew idiom, so it's an expression. You wouldn't take it literally, that he literally eats butter and literally eats honey. It means to be under affliction, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings. That is, the land of Israel is the land that's being abhorred, and the kings are the kings of Judah and Israel. The Lord shall bring upon thee and upon thy people and upon thy father's house days that have not come from the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria is going to take captive both Hoshea and Manasseh. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall hiss for the fly that is in the uttermost part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. And it goes on and talks about Assyria coming, and God taking Assyria is going to consume Israel. And it shall come to pass, for the abundance of milk they shall give he that shall eat butter, for butter and honey shall every one eat that is left in the land. So this is referring to the affliction of a captivity. And it shall come to pass in that day that every place shall be where there were 1,000 vines at 1,000 silverlings, it shall even be for briars and thorns. So the lands are going to be forsaken, and the vines are going to grow up, and you're going to have briars and thorns. So the land's not going to be attended. So this is referring to the captivity that happens under Assyria. And that's going to begin in 723 with the captivity of Hoshea, and go into 677 with the captivity of Manasseh. And then it's going to talk about the coming Assyrian invasion in chapter 8. So again, we're familiar with this. That's the one where it talks about, and he shall pass through Judah and shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of thy land, O Emmanuel. So this is referring to what happened with Assyria. And we've also made this application. This overflowing is typical of the Sunday law. And then you're going to have chapter 9. It's going to talk about this child that's going to be born. Chapter 10, the judgment over arrogant Assyria. And then finally, you're going to have this righteous branch. And so when we make an application to Christ, we're making an application because of a type that has occurred. Now, Manasseh is the wickedest king in Judah. And actually, the 2520 that comes upon Judah for what reason? Why does God say that you're going to have this come upon them?
Because of Manasseh.
Yeah, so it's going to be because of Manasseh. And it's going to say this here in, chapter 21, when Manasseh reigns. And it says in verse 11, because Manasseh king of Judah hath done these abominations, and hath done wickedly above all that the Amorites did, which were before him, and hath made Judah also to sin with his idols. Therefore thus saith the Lord, God of Israel, behold, I am bringing such evil upon Jerusalem and Judah, that whosoever heareth of it, both his ears shall tingle. I will stretch over Jerusalem the line of Samaria, and the plummet of the house of Ahab, and I will wipe Jerusalem as a man wipeth a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. So stretching over the line of Samaria, that's the 2520 for Samaria, that's going to be stretched over Jerusalem. So that's the 2520 for Judah. So what happened to Samaria is now going to happen to Judah. And in Manasseh's day, how long has it been since Hoshea was taken captive?
Forty-six
40
years, right?
Yeah. So you have 46 years between Hoshea's captivity and Manasseh's. And that's what's being referred to here. So it says that the 2520 for Judah is the result of Manasseh because of his sins. Now Manasseh is converted, right? Because butter and honey he shall eat before he knows to refuse the evil and choose the good, or choose the good and refuse the evil. So his conversion is dependent upon first the captivity of Hoshea, and then his own personal captivity when he's brought to Babylon by Esarhaddon. So when we look back at these things, I want to look at 2 Chronicles chapter 12 to address this other issue. So one of the things we have is we have Assyria. Assyria is who? If we're going to, Assyria comes from where?
They're a king of the north.
The king of the north. And Egypt is the king of the south. And Israel is caught between these two powers. And now, when the kingdom is divided in the time of Rehoboam, and Jeroboam takes the northern kingdom, Judah is under, so the northern kingdom, and both Judah, Egypt and Assyria are vying for the territory of the Levant, right, the Palestine. Now, Judah happens to be in the south of Israel, south of Palestine, and so it tends to be mostly influenced by Egypt, and northern Israel tends to mostly be influenced by Assyria. Of course, both of them are dealing with other enemies around them, but those are the two big powers. You got Assyria to the north and Egypt to the south. Now, it says in chapter 12, verse 1, and it came to pass when Rehoboam, so he's the king of Judah, had established the kingdom and had strengthened himself, he forsook the law of the Lord and all Israel with him. So it came to pass that in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem because they had transgressed against the Lord. With 1,200 chariots, 70,000 horsemen, the people were without number that came with him out of Egypt. The Lubims, that's the who are the Lubims?
Probably Libyans.
That's the Libyans, right? The Sukhims, nobody knows who they are, and the Ethiopians. Now, in Hebrew, that would be Cush, the Cushites, but they put it into a more modern English, the Greek name for them, the Ethiopians. So you have the Libyans, the Sukhims, and the Ethiopians. And of course, they came with him out of Egypt. Egypt is in Hebrew Mitzrayim, right? So the Egyptians. And he took the fenced cities which pertained to Judah and came to Jerusalem. Then came Shemaiah, the prophet, to Rehoboam and to the princes of Judah that were gathered together to Jerusalem because of Shishak, and said unto him, thus saith the Lord, ye have forsaken me, and therefore have I also left you in the hand of Shishak. Whereupon the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves, and they said, the Lord is righteous. And when the Lord saw that they had humbled themselves, the word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, saying, they have humbled themselves, therefore I will not destroy them, but I will grant them some deliverance, and my wrath shall not be poured out upon Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak. Nevertheless, they shall be his servants, that they may know my service and the service of the kingdoms of the country. So Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem and took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took all. He carried away also the shields of gold which Solomon had made. Instead of which, King Rehoboam made shields of brass and committed them to the hands of the chief of the guard that kept the entrance of the king's house. Now, there's a lot of history here, and I'm not going to go through this, but I am going to go to Asa's last years. I think it's chapter 16. Yeah, so this is another prophet. Now, who is Asa? Who was his father? Anybody know? Do you know the?
Manasseh, right?
No. No, you're thinking of someone else. Trying to remember who you're thinking of.
I'm thinking of, was it, there was Rehoboam and then his son. And then that was Abijah.
Yeah, well, Abijah, yeah. And then Asa, right? So this is after the time of Rehoboam. So that was the 5th year of Rehoboam that was referred to. And this is going to be the 36th year of Asa, right? That we're now looking at. So here it says, in the 6th and 30th year of the reign of Asa, Baasha, king of Israel, came up against Judah and built Ramah to the intent that he might let none go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. So he built a city along the trade route there. When Asa brought out silver and gold of the treasuries of the house of the Lord, of the king's house, and sent to Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, that dwelt at Damascus, saying, there's a league between me and thee, as there was between my father and thy father. Behold, I have sent thee silver and gold. Go break thy league with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may depart from me. So again, there you have Syria involved at the beginning of this history of the divided kingdoms, where sometimes northern Israel and sometimes Judah itself is appealing to Syria to be in league with them. Verse 4, and Ben-Hadad hearkened unto King Asa and sent the captains of his armies against the cities of Israel, and they smote Ijon and Dan and Abel-Maim and all the store cities of Naphtali. So these are northern cities in Israel. And it came to pass when Baasha heard it, that he left off building of Ramah and let his work cease. Then Asa the king took all Judah, and they carried away the stones of Ramah and the timber thereof, wherewith Baasha was building. And he built therewith Geba and Mizpah. And at that time Hanani the seer came to Asa king of Judah and said unto him, because thou hast relied on the king of Syria, and not relied on the Lord thy God, therefore is the host of the king of Syria escaped out of thine hand. Were not the Ethiopians and the Libyans a huge host, with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because thou didst rely on the Lord, he delivered them into thine hand. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth. So what's he referring to here? So he's talking to Asa. He's the grandson of Rehoboam. And we see here this reference again to what? What is being referenced here? When did God deliver them? That was chapter 12, right? So in the 5th year of Rehoboam, God delivered Judah from Egypt. Now here it refers to the Ethiopians and the Libyans. So why does he just refer to the Ethiopians and the Libyans? Why didn't he refer to the Egyptians and so forth? Why the Ethiopians and the Libyans?
Well, they were the ones that attacked previously
But they were with the Egyptians.
with Egypt.
So Egypt, they came up from Egypt, and there was 3 groups that came. So they had the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and the other ones that I can't remember who they are. So why does he just refer to the Ethiopians and the Libyans?
In a similar thought, then why are we referring to only 2 groups that confronted Elijah at Mount Carmel, and we're not referring to the 3rd, which was Jezebel at that time?
Okay. Because the question, that we have, because when we're looking at these histories, I mean, they are histories, but they are typical. And the choice of words here are significant. The Ethiopians and the Libyans represent the armies of Egypt that came against Rehoboam, right? So if we go to Daniel chapter 11,
So this is a threefold union against God's people, right?
yes, there is a threefold union. So now we're going to go back to verse 42 and 43 of Daniel 11. So it says, he shall stretch forth his hands also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So if we're going to look back at what this is referring to, we can definitely look at that history of the divided kingdom. You have Judah and Israel, and they have these battles against each other. And they also have, because they're involved in a sense in a civil war through that history, they're enemies of each other. But you also have Egypt and Syria, and sometimes Assyria. So the Syrians are Aram, right? And the Assyrians are the Assyrians. So the question then, when he has this reference in Daniel chapter 11, the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Why is he giving us this reference? Because we've just said it's the poor and the rich, which I'm not arguing against. But I'm saying, why are they mentioned specifically? What is trying to be, what is this representing?
The end of the world.
Well, it's the end of the world, but the Libyans and the Ethiopians, in the context back of chapter 12, and looking at it in chapter 16 of 2 Chronicles, they represent the armies of the Egyptians. And the other part of Egypt is the treasures of gold, silver, and the precious things of Egypt. So what would this be that the papacy has control of?
Military and economic means.
Okay, there you go. So it's economic and military. So the Libyans and the Ethiopians are not about really the rich and the poor. I'm not saying that, they can't represent that. But what this is talking about is the military power of the whole world, of the United Nations. Does that make sense? Anybody want to disagree with me?
I agree.
Okay, you agree. So that makes much more sense if you take what's happening in Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45, because you have the king of the north. He's going to have the armies of the United States. But in verse 42 to 43, he's going to have economic control of the world, and he's going to have the military control of the world. And that's much more complete. It's much more logical and consistent with the passage than to just say that the Libyans and the Ethiopians are the rich and the poor, or the poor and the rich. They are, but the poor and the rich both have armies, right? So that's all of the armies of the world are now going to be in control of the papacy. And that's why when it says, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. See, now he has all the economic and military power, but there's going to be a message, which is described as the tidings out of the east and the north, that are going to draw his attention, his ire. And that's going to be God's church. And now this makes sense when it says the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So what does it mean to be at his steps if this is a military power?
Do the Pope's bidding.
Okay, what's that, Stephen?
I was thinking doing the Pope's bidding.
Yeah, they're going to be doing the Pope's bidding. So the Pope is going to be in charge of all the armies of the world. He's going to be in control of all the economics of the world. And all of that energy is going to be focused upon attacking his real enemy. And his real enemy is those that oppose the papacy, the Protestants, of which Seventh-day Adventists are a part of that. So to me, this is much more consistent. Now, what we're trying not to do, and what we're not doing, is we're not saying that Jeff is wrong in the sense of from his perspective, but there is just things that he didn't see. Now, this is going to come to play as we start to look at the events that are occurring now, and what's going to continue to arise as we see what's going to be happening with the Sunday law unfolding, and how we're going to look at that. So that's the section there dealing with the Sunday law. But he's going to deal with this part. It says Part 4, but it's Part 4, taking the world. So he's already addressed this. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries of Egypt, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he's going to look at this in more detail. So we're gonna again look at this in more detail, because he is originally addressing what was happening in the United States. So we're kind of going to review this a bit next week, and I'm going to try to add some stuff. So we've already addressed this, but I want to go over it again, and especially dealing with the tidings out of the north and the east, and then the final events, seas of the mountains between that. So we're going to go back, review that on Sunday morning. So we should be able to get through this section, at least that's my hope. And then we'll get to the purification of God's church in our studies for the rest of the week, next week. And the purification of God's church, this is an important point, because this is 1998. That's when he presents these notes. I know these notes are from 1998, and the previous notes were really his notes from 1997. So these are now a new set of notes that we're going to be looking at later on. Any final comments? I went a little bit over time, so.
Yeah, did Jeff mention anything about the environmental issues with Sunday law, like we have today?
The which?
The environmental issues.
No,
Not
not
with the Sunday law.
no,
You didn't mention nothing? Okay.
not that I've seen. The only thing that Jeff does address is the sort of paganism, I can't remember the word that he talks about, but there is this movement towards a sort of a pagan kind of spiritualism,
Oh, I see.
Pachamama and all that kind of stuff.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that stuff. But
Okay.
even though it's kind of a nature worship, it hadn't in the 90s bloomed, pardon the illustration, bloomed into what we see now with the environmental movement.
Right.
It may have just been starting, but it wasn't something on his radar to see to where it would get to. But yeah, definitely environmentalism is, he at least sees the seeds of that turned into what we would call the modern environmentalism, that
Right.
to disguise itself as some kind of concern for the environment, where really it's just a type of nature worship.
Yeah. Definitely.
It's not a logical system of scientific approach to the environment. It's really a mystical approach to the environment. So anyway, thanks for that. So hopefully that was helpful, and let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for the time that we had together to study. We ask for your continued help in our personal studies, in our struggles with sin, and we ask, Lord, that we can be faithful in the little things you place before us each day. Be with us in our work. We ask for your angels to be around us, to give us safety. And we pray for each person studying these things, that we can continue to learn and grow and be changed by an understanding of the truth. Thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.